Hey guys, tonight we drift into a moment so bizarre, so feathered, and so unmistakably French, that it somehow manages to feel both ridiculous and oddly profound. Imagine yourself in a Renaissance courtroom, not the grand Versailles sort with chandeliers and powdered wigs, but a smaller, darker, stuffier chamber that smells faintly of old bread, ink, and candle smoke. You're seated on a hard wooden bench, pressed between a hunched elderly woman in 4 layers of linen and a wide-eyed monk, who is sweating through his robes. All eyes turn forward, and there it is, a peacock, not perched in a tree, not fanning its tail on the lawn of a wealthy estate. No, this peacock stands at the front of the court, bound loosely. Don't worry, in a woven reed crate. The crate sits directly beneath the crucifix, as if to suggest the bird might soon face judgment not just from man, but also from God. You're here because this peacock is accused of vanity, of prideful screeching at dawn, of strutting in front of church windows as if it owns the building, of corrupting the local children with its plumage. You squint, unsure if you've wandered into a real trial or some community theater rehearsal gone off script. But no, this is real, or was, depending on how far back your imagination can stretch. Welcome to Renaissance France, where a peacock, yes, a literal bird, is being put on trial for crimes against morality and public order. You probably won't survive this, legally speaking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight, and what's the local time? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The clerk calls the court to order. A bell rings. Somewhere outside, a dog barks in the distance. The magistrate raises an eyebrow. Then, without flinching, he reads the charges aloud. You lean forward, just slightly. The peacock tilts its head, almost curious. This is about to be absurd. Behind the bird stands its defender, a weary man in dusty robes with an expression suggesting he has lost 3 chess games in a row and just been asked to defend a vegetable. He clears his throat. Your honors, the creature before you, though extravagant in feather and frequent in voice, is not guilty of the charges laid forth. A long pause, for he is, quite plainly, a bird. Gasps, murmurs ripple through the chamber. Someone drops a quill. Of course, you know the Renaissance was a time of explosive cultural flourish, art, music, printing presses, Galileo squinting at stars. But what often gets buried beneath the more glamorous brushstrokes is just how strange and theatrical everyday justice could be, especially when animals were involved. You hear the scribes mumbling behind you. This one won't be easy to summarize, one says. Can't we just say feathered interference with church decorum and be done with it? Not so fast. See, animal trials weren't rare. In fact, for several centuries, they were disturbingly common. And not just for peacocks. Pigs stood trial for trampling children. Roosters were hauled in for laying eggs, an apparently unnatural and therefore demonic act. Even insects, yes, insects, were sometimes brought to court. Imagine the bailiff chasing after a particularly rude grasshopper with a summons. But this case feels different. The town seems divided. Half think the peacock is a nuisance, an unholy distraction who disrupts prayer with its calls and distracts young women from their embroidery. The other half admire the bird, see it as an emblem of divine creation, maybe even as a sign of God's splendor. After all, doesn't it say in Psalms that the heavens declare the glory of the Lord? And what, if not glorious, is a bird wearing a rainbow? The peacock, meanwhile, ruffles its feathers in what can only be described as smug disinterest. It lets out a single screech, high-pitched, raspy, and startling enough to make a scribe spilling all over his sleeve. You suppress a giggle. So much for courtroom decorum. A nun testifies next. She's furious. It mirrors the sin of Lucifer, she whispers. So full of pride, so eager to be seen. Why, I saw it preen for a full 10 minutes outside the chapel window. 10 minutes, I counted. You picture a feathered demon with tiny goat hooves and quickly push the thought aside. Then a boy takes the stand. He's about 9, holding a crust of bread and clearly bribed to speak. I like it, he shrugs. It's pretty. Also, it chased my brother once, so that was funny. not exactly a solid witness. Historians still argue whether trials like this were truly believed by the people, or simply performed as symbolic theater and elaborate pantomime, through which villages processed larger anxieties: sin, law, power, and the unpredictable wildness of the natural world. You shift in your seat as the sun through the stained glass turns the courtroom into a kaleidoscope. Someone's sleeping behind you. Someone else is chewing something far too crunchy. It's then that you notice the lawyer for the prosecution is really taking this personally. He has a scroll half unfurled listing 27 interruptions to sacred reflection allegedly caused by the Peacock. Things like preening during Easter Mass and blocking the bishop's donkey with flair. Flair is underlined. And what is the defense doing during all this? He's feeding the peacock what appears to be a grape. You almost respect that level of indifference. The magistrate sighs, "Let us recess until afternoon. I need a moment." You trail out into the cobbled courtyard with the others, overhearing snippets of heated bird-related debates. One man insists the peacock once bowed during a funeral. Another claims the bird has never blinked and is therefore possessed. Somewhere between absurdity and ritual, you realize this is less about one bird and more about all of us, our need to make sense of chaos, to assign blame, to dress wildness in legal robes, even if the wildness squawks in our faces and tries to steal bread. You pause, feeling the breeze shift, and you realize this is only the beginning. You wander back into the courtroom after the recess, trailing behind a group of villagers arguing about whether birds can feel guilt. One man swears his rooster apologized to him once. Another counters that birds have no souls and therefore cannot sin. But then, someone says, thoughtfully, why will we need a trial at all? And that's the strange part, isn't it? The fact that this peacock trial isn't a wartime farce. It's part of something older, stranger, and disturbingly methodical. You settle back onto your splintery bench as a judge clears his throat and announces, "Let the court acknowledge precedent." Yes, precedent. Turns out, France has a long and bizarre history of putting animals on trial. You don't know whether to laugh or feel deeply concerned. Either way, you're hooked. Now it's the clerk's turn. He reads, with much gravitas, from a tattered law book that smells faintly of mold and wax stop. In the year of our Lord 1386, in the village of Falaise, he drones, a pig was tried for the crime of murder. You blink slowly. He repeats it. This particular pig had supposedly mauled a small child. It was captured, chained, dressed in human clothing because why not, and marched before a judge. A lawyer was appointed. Witnesses were called. And in the end, the pig was found guilty and publicly executed. You stare forward, stunned. You're trying to picture it, a hog in a waistcoat, solemnly listening to legal accusations while a notary scratches away on a parchment. The pig, of course, said nothing, but silence, in court, can be interpreted as damning. Historically accurate, the monk beside you whispers, "There are drawings, lovely." This wasn't an isolated incident either. For centuries, trials like this were fairly routine across parts of Europe, particularly France, Italy, and the Swiss cantons. Pigs were the most common defendants probably, because pigs lived in close proximity to people, had sharp teeth, and no sense of personal space. But there were also documented cases involving bulls, goats, horses, dogs, cats, mules, and yes, birds. Roosters got into trouble often, especially those who crowed during sermons or laid eggs, which, again, shouldn't be possible unless you're dealing with a hen or something darker. One infamous trial from Basel saw a rooster burned alive for laying an egg, allegedly the work of the devil. Historians still argue whether these trials were intended as real legal proceedings, or more like grim moral pageants, but the records are clear. Lawyers were hired, verdicts were rendered, and punishments sometimes elaborate were carried out. Hanging, beheading, exile. You imagine a pig being banished and try not to smile. There were even separate legal systems for these cases. If the animal belonged to someone, say, a farmer's dog bit the local priest, then the case went to a civil court. The owner might be fined or the animal confiscated. But if the animal was wild or autonomous, it could be tried in an ecclesiastical court, subject to both divine and legal judgment. which is how you end up in situations where beetles are excommunicated. Yes, that happened. In 1510, a swarm of weevils was brought before the Bishop of Autun. The townspeople claimed the bugs had ruined their crops. So the bishop ordered a formal trial, hired a legal team to represent the beetles, a real team, and after a lengthy process, issued a decree of banishment. The beetles, shockingly, did not comply. Ungrateful pests, someone behind you mutters. As absurd as it all seems, there's a peculiar logic here. Medieval and Renaissance societies were deeply invested in the idea of divine order. Every creature had its place, its role, its moral responsibilities. So when that order was disrupted when a pig killed, when a rooster behaved like a witch, it wasn't just an annoyance, it was a threat to cosmic balance. Which brings you back to the peacock. It's back on its perch, preening like it owns the place. The judge glares at it with the same exhausted disgust one might reserve for an off-key organist. We proceed now to witness testimony. He announces, "Let the court recognize Brother Clement." Brother Clement is very old and very slow, and he walks to the front with the gravity of someone about to announce the moon is made of bread. He clears his throat and begins. "I have observed the accused on 7 occasions, disturbing morning prayers with shrieks most unholy. The peacock lets out a majestic cry. The timing is exquisite. The judge bangs his gavel. Silence in the court. You think he's talking to the bird." Brother Clement continues. "Its feathers reflect the sunlight in distracting patterns. Once, a novice walked into a pillar, gasps, again. These people love gasping." He also notes that peacocks were not native to France, and were usually imported by the aristocracy as ornamental animals. To flaunt vanity, he adds gravely, is to invite sin. Peacocks had long been associated with pride. In Christian iconography, their image was debated endlessly. Were they symbols of resurrection because their flesh supposedly didn't rot? Or were they examples of vanity because they never stopped showing off? Historians still debate the theological messaging behind peacock imagery. Some cathedrals included them in stained glass, others banned them from sacred spaces altogether. You start to wonder if the bird has any idea what's going on. It probably doesn't, but somehow, its indifference is making the humans increasingly emotional. One woman starts crying softly in the corner. The scribe's hand is cramping. The judge is sweating, and the peacock just stands there regal, shimmering, unbothered. You glance over at the defense attorney. He's now nibbling a biscuit. No one seems to know how this trial is going to end. And honestly, neither do you. But one thing is clear. This bird is on trial not for what it did, but for what it represents. Wildness, pride, beauty, disruption. And in a world desperately trying to hold onto order, those are dangerous things. The judge sighs again. You hear the faint rustle of feathers. Court is adjourned for now. The courtroom hushes again the next morning. You're back in your now familiar seat. The wooden bench just as uncomfortable. The peacock just as insufferably magnificent. The morning light catches its feathers like stained glass in motion, shimmering in those impossible blues and greens. The defense attorney arrives late, brushing crumbs from his robes, looking like a man who has overslept for something ridiculous again. Let the arguments resume. The judge says, rubbing his temples, today's session, philosophy, or at least something that tries to resemble it. Because now, the court must answer the question no one has dared to say aloud until now. Can a bird be guilty of a moral crime? You blink slowly. The monk next to you leans over and mutters. This is going to get theological. Indeed, the prosecutor rises, scroll in hand, and declares that the peacock's behavior is not just disruptive, it is morally corrupt. Its vanity, he intones, is a sin echoed by Lucifer himself, cast from heaven not for violence, but for pride. The courtroom nods solemnly, as if they all have personal experience with the devil's poultry. The defense stands and raises a single brow. Your Honor, my client, he says, gesturing to the bird, has a brain the size of a walnut. You suppress a snort. And I say that not to insult him, but to suggest that moral agency, the ability to choose between good and evil, requires a certain capacity for reflection, for choice, for conscience. My client chooses corn. He rests his case. But that's the crux of it. isn't it? The idea of moral agency. It's one thing to punish a creature that's dangerous. It's another to blame it for sin. Can a goat feel remorse? Can a crow plan vengeance? Can a peacock, with its iridescent wardrobe and screaming alarm clock voice, really know that it's distracting the faithful? Historians still argue whether these trials were genuine efforts to interpret animals as moral actors or merely legal rituals masking deeper social tensions. Some say these courts used animals as scapegoats for human failings. Blaming a rooster for famine was easier than admitting the bishop hoarded grain. Still, the prosecution continues. He quotes St. Augustine, who once theorized about the soul of animals, though not very kindly. He brings up Aristotle, who, if he were alive to witness this, would probably demand stronger wine. Someone presents a chart. You're not sure what the chart depicts exactly, but it seems to suggest that squirrels rank just above ducks in terms of potential guilt. Meanwhile, the peacock begins to preen itself again, slow, deliberate, the feathers fan slightly, catching the light with theatrical timing. You swear the bird is aware it's the star of the show. The crowd is transfixed. You can see a boy sketching the peacock from across the aisle. Wide-eyed, another girl imitates its strut behind her mother's back. The tension breaks briefly when the bird lets out another ear-piercing hurrah-whook. It echoes like a trumpet down the marble halls. The judge flinches. Continue, he sighs. The next witness is the town's baker. Yes, really, apparently. The peacock once strutted through his yard, startling his cat, who then knocked over a jug of milk that was meant for the king's cousin's breakfast, or something. It's unclear how much of this is legally relevant, but the baker is angry. That bird holds its head too high, he grumbles. It walks like it owns the street, a low murmur of agreement. You think, for a brief moment, about how many things humans will project onto animals. That a peacock, doing what peacocks do, screeching, preening, walking like it owns the street, could be interpreted as defiant, as vain, as corruptive. Because that's the thing. The peacock isn't just a bird in this courtroom. It's become a symbol, a stand-in for aristocratic arrogance, for foreign extravagance, for everything in this little town that feels unfair, unbalanced, and out of reach. And the people are tired. You glance back at the court scribes. One is sketching a diagram labeled Peacock Pride Spectrum. Another is writing a Latin phrase that, you suspect, loosely translates to "we've lost the plot." But there's one person who takes this all terrifyingly seriously, the bishop's assistant. He presents a stack of parchment that outlines a theory, brace yourself, that peacocks were used in ancient Persia as spies. They remember faces. He insists. They listen at windows. Their tails are shaped like eyes for a reason. Someone whispers, "Is he all right?" No one answers. In the middle of all this, the defense leans forward again. "Let's suppose," he says, "that my client is indeed vain, that he enjoys being watched, that he knows he's beautiful. Is that truly a sin?" He gestures to the bishop's ring, to the magistrate's velvet cuffs. We live in a world built on pageantry, on spectacle, on ritual robes and incense and silver goblets. Why should my client be punished for doing what this court does every day? A bold move, risky, possibly brilliant. Historians today still debate whether such defenders were genuine believers in animal innocence, or simply cynical performers making the best of a strange job. Either way, they were often clever, eloquent, and oddly poetic. The courtroom falls silent. The peacock, as if sensing the drama, lifts one foot and holds it midair. It stares directly at the judge. For a moment, everything feels suspended, feathered, fragile. Then the judge sighs, sets down his gavel, and says, "Let us break for midday prayer. We will resume moral deliberations this afternoon." You rise with the others, slowly. The peacock squawks once more, then settles into what appears to be a nap. You suspect it sleeps better than most of the humans in this building. You step out into the sunlight, dazed. You've just sat through an actual legal debate about whether a peacock can commit sin, and the answer is still unclear. You return from the midday break feeling a little sundrowsy, a little unsure whether you're in a courtroom or a satire. Someone's selling tiny peacock figurines outside, now hand-carved from walnut wood. 2 sous apiece. The town is leaning in. You overhear a boy ask if the bird might be crowned after the trial if it wins. His sister scoffs, birds don't get crowns. And yet, here we are. The courtroom is buzzing again as the next session begins, not with legal theory this time, but with something far more material, fashion. Yes, because the defense now argues that peacocks are not only innocent but misunderstood fashion icons. You sit straighter. This you didn't expect, ladies and gentlemen of the court. The lawyer begins, holding up what appears to be a velvet cap adorned with yet peacock feathers. I ask you to consider the hypocrisy. Gasps again. This court runs on gasps. This bird is on trial for flaunting its beauty, he continues. Yet these very feathers adorn the hats of noblemen, the fans of bishops, the slippers of merchant wives. Are we to punish the source and yet revel in the spoils? He sets the cap gently on the bench before him, as though it might testify. A murmur ripples through the chamber. One of the scribes is writing flamboyant hypocrisy in the margins of his notes. You admire. The phrase, peacocks, after all, were exotic imports during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, originally from India and Persia, brought over by traders and nobles. They quickly became luxury pets and garden ornaments for the elite. Having one strut round your courtyard was a way of saying, yes, I am wealthy enough to feed something utterly useless. But that didn't stop people from assigning them symbolism. In Christian art, the peacock sometimes represented immortality. In other paintings, it embodied pride, the deadliest of the 7 sins. Scholars still debate whether the bird was admired more for its beauty or feared for what that beauty meant. And now here it is, once again center stage. The actual peacock shifts in its crate, clearly over all this attention, and emits a low, rattling squawk that vibrates through the rafters. Case in point, the baker mutters under his breath. The next witness is a seamstress. She carries a folded gown to the front of the courtroom and holds it up. It's simple linen, except for a collar embroidered with vivid blue-green thread and a pattern mimicking feathers. Sold out of these last Lent, she says proudly. Priests, merchants' wives, even the mayor's niece. So the peacock, the judge muses aloud, has become wearable. Very, the seamstress nods. I've got a waiting list. You're beginning to see where this is going. The defense isn't just saying the bird is innocent. It's saying the bird is a mirror reflecting the vanity of those who now sit in judgment. It's the kind of argument that sounds like philosophy, but feels like an insult. You love it. The prosecution counters swiftly. Beauty without humility, he declares, is dangerous. Lucifer was also beautiful, as were the sirens who lured men to death with their song. The peacock lets out another screech. Exactly, says the prosecutor, waving toward the bird like it just cursed at him. But others aren't convinced. A noblewoman stands from the back without being called and offers a quiet testimony. When I was a girl, I saw a peacock for the first time, she says, voice gentle. It stood in the courtyard. It didn't speak. It didn't boast. It was simply itself. And I've never forgotten it. That moment was more prayerful than most sermons. A long silence follows. One of the monks clears his throat awkwardly. Historians still debate the cultural double standards embedded in these trials. That peacocks were seen as sinful when they flaunted beauty, yet people who dressed themselves in feathers or wealth were considered admirable. The lines between vanity and dignity blurred depending on species and social class. You watch as the judge rubs his forehead, clearly regretting his career choices. Then, in a slightly desperate move, the prosecution calls an ornithologist, or, well, the Renaissance version of one. He's an old man with thick glasses and a collection of strange bones in his satchel. He approaches the crate cautiously. The pavo cristatus, he announces, is known for its extravagant display. However, this is not a behavior of pride but of mating. You feel the tension shift. Mating, the judge repeats, eyebrows raised. Yes, the man says, quite proudly, the tail display is not for arrogance. It's an instinctive courtship gesture, a signal to peons, a natural impulse, not vanity, not pride. There is a beat of absolute silence. Then someone in the gallery chuckles. So it's just flirting. A few people laugh. You look at the bird. It looks back at you. For a moment, You think you understand each other. The judge leans back in his chair, slightly stunned. So what you're saying, he murmurs, is that this entire case is about a bird being a bird? Precisely. The peacock flaps its wings and shifts in its crate. Somewhere in the gallery, applause. Starred Sand is immediately shushed. You're not sure whether to feel disappointed or delighted. This trial started as moral theater. But now, here you are, listening to experts in medieval animal behavior explain that all this might just be biology in a fancy coat. Still, not everyone is convinced. The bishop's assistant is whispering urgently in Latin. The baker is muttering about spilled milk again. And the defense has begun polishing his fingernails on his sleeve like he just won something. The judge bangs his gavel. We will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments, he says. Court is adjourned. As people begin to file out, you remain seated a moment longer, watching the peacock. Its tail is folded. Its head tilts lazily. It doesn't look guilty. It just looks tired. You think of all the things humans project onto animals: sin, beauty, threat, blame. And sometimes, without meaning to, we put them on trial for what we fear in ourselves. The courtroom empties slowly. The bird closes its eyes. Another day of absurdity draws to a close. You arrive early the next morning, earlier than usual. Something about the rhythm of this trial, with its preening defendants and deeply confused moral philosophies, has begun to take hold of you. The Peacock trial is no longer merely absurd, it's become oddly compelling. Today's courtroom is quieter, tense. The crowd is thinned a bit, though the regulars remain. The baker, his grudge. The bishop's assistant looking perpetually betrayed. The defense, who now seems to relish each word as a kind of personal theater. But today, you're about to watch a theological brawl, one feathered with irony and veiled threats. Because now the debate shifts to the very core of the accusation. Who really sinned first, the bird or the bishop? The judge calls the court to order. We proceed, he says warily, with examination of spiritual offenses. This time, it's the clergy who step forward. A pair of solemn friars, armed with scrolls, cross themselves before speaking as if what they're about to say might summon lightning. The peacock, says the first, embodies the sin of pride, first committed by Lucifer. Its display, its sound, its unwillingness to serve any purpose, but to be admired, it is a creature that draws others into temptation. He stares at the bird with such intensity you're worried he might burst into tears. But the defense smiles, stepping forward slowly. May I ask, he begins, how many stained glass windows in your cathedral bear the image of this very bird? The friar flinches. And have you not compared Christ's resurrection to the supposed incorruptibility of the peacock as flesh? Another flinch. This is getting good. Theologians in the Middle Ages were famously conflicted about peacocks. Some insisted they were symbols of eternity, as their meat was believed not to decay. Others claimed their cries resembled that of a soul in torment. In manuscripts, peacocks appear beside angels and sometimes demons. Historians still debate whether the church ever reached consensus, or if it simply borrowed the peacock's image as needed, depending on the message of the sermon. The second friar tries a new approach. Even if it is not the bird's fault, its influence is dangerous. Vanity spreads. Pride is contagious. The creature may not know it sins, but it makes sinners of those who watch it. You blink. That's oddly poetic, terrifying, but poetic. The bishop's assistant rises next, voice sharp. I have received complaints from no fewer than 8 parishioners, he says, that during prayer, their thoughts wandered to the bird, to its plumage, to its cries. One woman confessed she dreamed of feathers for a week. There are gasps. Of course. You glance over to the peacock, it yawns. Then the defense leans forward, quietly now. Let us consider, then, who placed the bird where it could be seen. Everyone turns. He paces slowly, like a man pulling at threads. The peacock was brought to the bishop's garden by a visiting noble. It was not wild. It was not free. It was curated, caged, fed, shown, and then when it behaved as it must, it was condemned. He pauses. Who invited sin? The room stills. The bishop's assistant looks like he might actually combust. There is a murmur behind you. The monk beside you whispers, we dress it up in gold. and then blame it for shining. The judge lifts a hand for silence, his face unreadable. You can feel the tension shift. The narrative is turning, and it isn't the first time. In 1494, in a small French town, a sow and her piglets were put on trial for damaging a vineyard. The mother pig was found guilty, but the piglets were acquitted. Why? Because they had been raised in the environment their mother provided. Historians still argue whether that was early evidence of legal nuance or just rural chaos, but this case echoes that logic. You begin to see the peacock less as a figure of guilt and more as a symbol of misplaced blame, of fragile authority, of people terrified by the very things they themselves created. He brings out a tattered volume and reads from De Animalibus, a medieval bestiary. The peacock, it says, is proud of its tail and ashamed of its feet, and when it sees its feet, it cries aloud. He slams the book closed. Even the bird is aware of its own vanity. The prosecution, perhaps sensing the tide turning, makes one final attempt. The courtroom seems to nod, along until the defense chuckles. Perhaps, he says, it's just upset that it has to stand in court for being beautiful. The judge glares at him, but says nothing. You sit with that line. Being beautiful, being noticed, being loud. Are those sins? Or just natural traits that make people uncomfortable? One final witness is called, a shepherd, sunburned and scruffy, smelling faintly of sheep. He approaches the bird with cautious respect. It scared my dog once, he admits, but it also made my daughter smile when she saw it for the first time. He looks up at the judge. That ought to count for something. There is something gentle in his voice, honest. Quiet. The judge closes his notes. We shall hear closing arguments tomorrow, he says. I encourage all present to reflect not only on guilt, but on what we choose to judge and why. The court is dismissed. You exit slowly, weaving through the murmuring crowd. The baker is muttering about injustice. The seamstress is already sewing more feathered collars. A group of children are chasing each other, mimicking bird calls. In the peacock, it stands in its crate, tail low, eyes half-lidded, utterly untouched by the moral panic it has caused. You wonder, not for the first time, whether humans are trying to judge something far bigger than a bird, something like change, or beauty, or the ungovernable wild. The dawn of the final day breaks with a soft drizzle, the kind that taps gently on windows and makes everyone just a little more introspective than usual. You wrap your cloak tighter, stepping around puddles on your way back to the courthouse. The town is quieter this morning, or maybe people are simply waiting to see which way the wind will blow. You enter the courtroom to find the peacock already in place. Fluffed up slightly from the damp, it looks, if anything, more regal than ever. Like it knows this is the day of reckoning and couldn't care less. Today's session opens not with arguments, but with noise. Because the peacock has chosen this exact moment to launch into a series of long, echoing cries. Hraawwk, Hrog. The sound bounces off the high stone ceiling, startling a scribe into spilling his inkwell. A juror covers her ears. The bishop's assistant visibly winces. The baker groans. The judge pinches the bridge of his nose. It continues. 5 calls, then 6. Then, just as a final protest is about to rise from the galler's silence, you could hear a feather drop. The judge clears his throat. May we continue? He says. Voice dry as old parchment. Today's testimony is less theological and more ornithological, because the question has subtly shifted. Not whether the peacock is prideful, but whether its very nature is disruptive enough to justify censure. The defense, clearly leaning into the bird's chaotic energy, waves a hand. Your Honors, we now examine the character of the accused, and with that, he produces a book. The title, in florid Renaissance Latin, loosely translates to a brief compendium of foul behavior for the ill-informed but curious layman. Delightful, he opens to a chapter labeled Peacocks, the Screamers of Paradise. Then he begins to read aloud. The male peacock does emit sounds unlike songbirds, but rather shouts. These vocalizations are of a pitch and volume that suggest distress or demand attention. However, These sounds are chiefly seasonal and in the service of attracting a mate. You look at the peacock. It looks at the ceiling, possibly bored, possibly composing its next sonata. The defense continues, quoting various naturalists and herbalists who have studied the bird. Its cry is thought to herald rain, he says. Farmers in some regions consider it lucky, in others it is feared. Either way, it is never quiet. Then he adds, with a straight face, and to punish the bird for that would be to punish a bell for ringing. It's a poetic turn. And annoyingly, it sticks. The prosecution responds by bringing in a page from a neighboring village. A boy who witnessed the peacock startle an elderly man into dropping a communion wafer. The boy fidgets with his tunic as he speaks. It yelled real loud, he says. Made the priest drop the holy bread. You glance over at the judge. His patience is hanging by a very thin thread. The assistant bishop, looking flushed, stands to speak again. We must consider, he insists, the pattern of disturbance. This is not a single offense. The bird shouts often, at unpredictable intervals, at sacred times. You realize something. This whole trial may have begun with a complaint about vanity, but now it's about volume. People are, quite simply, annoyed. Which raises another question. When does annoyance become crime? Historians still debate whether the animal trials were, at times, mere expressions of social frustration, that is, the barnyard scapegoat for things no one else could control: famine, plagues, grief, inequality. It's easier, perhaps, to find a bird than admit the heavens are silent. You're jolted from your thoughts when the court scribe presents a list, a formal, itemized catalog of disturbances caused by the peacock. Interrupted morning mass, 6 times disrupted nap of a visiting bishop, 1 time chased merchant's dog, 2 times blocked view of altar with tail, 3 times screamed during burial service, 1 time uncertain. The judge reads the list slowly, then sets it down. The bird has no concept of sacred time, the defense mutters. It's a creature of the sun, not the bell. Still, the crowd murmurs. You can sense it. The people are torn, some amused, some ready to pluck the bird themselves. And somewhere in all of this is the deeper truth. The peacock is not a nuisance because it's wicked. It's a nuisance because it doesn't care about the rules. It doesn't quiet down for morning prayer. It doesn't lower its feathers in deference. It doesn't recognize rank or ritual or the human need for predictable silence. It simply is. And humans are terrible at tolerating what they cannot tame. Someone stands up in the back, an old man with rheumy eyes. I don't know if it's guilty, he says slowly, but I do know this. We've spent 3 days trying to reason with a bird. Maybe the real crime is ours. And then he sits, without fanfare, without applause, just sits. Historians still revisit this case, if only for how human it was. Not legally remarkable, not even that rare, but telling, because when confronted with a creature that disrupted their rhythm, their expectations, their sacred quiet, they called it evil, and demanded that it explain itself, even if it couldn't speak. The judge bangs his gavel once. Enough, he says. We will hear closing statements this afternoon. Then a verdict. You stand slowly. The peacock shifts again, tail dragging. Behind it in soft swirls, and as the courtroom empties, you swear just for a second that it looks smug. The final session begins with an air of quiet ceremony. The crowd is larger than ever. People lean against columns, crowd into doorways, even perch on the ledges of the windows, craning their necks to see. You find your usual seat, though someone new has taken the most place beside you, a young woman holding a feather quill and sketching the bird with feverish intensity. She doesn't look up, just murmurs, I need to get the tail just right. Fair enough. The judge arrives late. He looks tired, the kind of tired only brought on by 3 days of trying to extract moral clarity from an animal that doesn't recognize courtrooms. Today, closing arguments. This is the final performance, the last act of a very strange play. You can feel the Anticipation, the way a crowd hushes just before a play resumes or a storm rolls in. The prosecution rises. His robes are neatly pressed, his scrolls freshly arranged. He bows slightly and begins, "Your honors, good people, let us not be distracted by feathers, nor lulled by color. We are here not to admire, but to judge. This creature has defied the rhythm of our days. It has desecrated prayer, mocked quiet, disrupted mourning. And for what? Attention." He pauses, letting the words settle. "It was brought to this town as a symbol of nobility." He continues, "And perhaps that is the root of our discomfort. We do not punish the peacock because it is wild, but because it reminds us that power, beauty, and chaos often strut hand in hand." A soft murmur rolls through the audience. He goes further. "Its cries are not evil, but they are unrepentant. It does not hide, it does not hush, and in its refusal to conform, it unsettles us." Then, dramatically, "And so, like Lucifer, it must fall. Mic drop. If this were modern times, you're pretty sure he'd be cueing dramatic organ music. But now the defense stands. No scrolls, no notes, just his voice. I admire your passion," he begins, glancing at the prosecution. "But we must not confuse offense with evil, nor chaos with sin. The peacock did not seek to disrupt. It was placed here, in our garden, among our bells and candles and expectations. And it acted as it always has." He turns to face the bird. "It has no speech, no scripture, no sense of sanctity. But it is honest, every feather, every scream, every insolent strutted is the truth of what it is." Then he faces the court again. "Can we say the same?" The question hangs like smoke. He walks forward now, hands outstretched. "We call it prideful because we're embarrassed by our own envy. We call it distracting because we fear what we can't control. We call it disruptive because it doesn't kneel when we kneel." He points to the bishop's assistant. "We dressed it up in holiness and then blamed it for not praying. Then so quietly you almost miss it," he says, "we have not put this bird on trial. We have put ourselves on trial and disguised the verdict in feathers. No one moves." Historians still dissect this speech. Some call it excessive, some strangely moving, but all agree it marked the end of a strange chapter in legal tradition. The judge clears his throat. Slowly, deliberately, he stands. He begins with the facts. The peacock was brought by a noble. It was not wild. It was not disruptive by human standards. It was simply not human. It crowed, as peacocks do. It strutted, as peacocks do. It disturbed people, not out of intent, but by being present in a world not built for it. And then comes the ruling. In consideration of the arguments, the witness testimonies, the precedent of animal trials, and the nature of the accused, he pauses. We find the peacock not guilty of moral wrongdoing. There's no cheer. Not at first, just a long exhale from the room, like a strange pressure has lifted. However, he continues, the court does find the bird incompatible with ecclesiastical quietude. Translation, it's not evil, but it's allowed for church. The bird shall be relocated to a noble estate outside town. The judge says, there. It may scream at clouds to its heart's content. The audience murmurs, relieved. Some nod. A few chuckle. The peacock fluffs its feathers and lets out a triumphant, slightly defined screech. Of course, you stay in your seat as people begin to file out. The trial is over. The scrolls are packed. The guards lift the crate with care. But you don't move. Not yet. You look around this strange courtroom, once filled with accusations and psalms, now humming with quiet reflection. The baker's gone silent. The bishop's assistant looks vaguely defeated. The seamstress, seated in the back, begins sketching a new embroidery pattern spirals, inspired by feathers. You think about all the creatures who were never given such a chance. The pigs who didn't get lawyers. The beetles who were cursed from pulpits. The roosters burned because they laid a single egg. The world is full of trials, you realize. for those who don't fit neatly into human expectations, and sometimes the verdict isn't about guilt. Sometimes it's just about making the noise go somewhere else. The crate moves past you. The peacock lifts its head. It meets your eyes, and in that moment, you swear it knows exactly what just happened. Asterisk, the day after the verdict, the peacock is gone. Not just from the courtroom, but from the entire town. No cries echo off the chapel stones. No feathers swirl like confetti on the wind. The silence is almost unsettling. Like a song has ended mid-note, you wander the market square, half expecting to see it perched on a rooftop, still judging everyone with those marble black eyes. But all you find are tired merchants gossiping, neighbors, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. The town, it seems, is moving on. But you're not quite ready to, because the trial may be over, but something strange has happened. The bird may have been deemed innocent, but the town, it feels, changed. People are talking, whispering, reflecting. And today, they start judging each other. It begins at the bakery. You're there purely for the cinnamon buns, but the baker, who spent half the trial muttering about spilled milk and moral decline, is now on the defensive. A customer accuses him of charging double for sacred bread on fasting days. Another mentions quite loudly that he wore peacock feathers on his wedding hat. The baker flushes. It was decorative. He huffs. Not symbolic. Someone replies. Like the bird? You take your bun and quietly leave. At the tailor's stall, things are worse. A woman demands a refund for a feathered collar, claiming it now feels prideful. Another asks if wearing turquoise is sinful. The tailor, to her credit, shrugs and says, only if you crow. The seamstress from the trial appears and gently tells people that feathers are neither saintly nor sinful. They're just feathers, she says, like buttons or bells. A man with a hawk on his shoulder mutters, hawks don't get put on trial. You've clearly never met a bishop with chickens. Someone responds, you chuckle. But under the laughter, there's tension. The trial has opened a kind of wound small, but raw. For 3 days, the people of this town poured their frustrations, fears, and superstitions into a brightly colored scapegoat. Now that it's gone, they're not quite sure where to put all those feelings. Historians still debate whether these trials caused long-term social unrest or simply offered cathartic release. Some towns reportedly grew more harmonious after animal verdicts. Others descended into petty accusations and theological nitpicking. It varied, like weather or peacock moods. You decide to visit the church. It's quiet, but not empty. A few parishioners kneel near the altar. The bishop's assistant is there, of course, looking severely inconvenienced by your presence. He's straightening prayer books with the solemnity of a man who once tried to exorcise a bird and failed. You offer a nod. He does not return it. In one corner, you spot a young boy lighting a candle. He whispers something into the flame, then glances toward the empty garden where the peacock once strutted. He doesn't look angry or afraid, just thoughtful. You realize something, for the children. The bird wasn't a symbol of sin. It was just marvelous. Later, outside, you overhear a group of teens arguing about the peacock's true crime. One says vanity, another says volume, a third insists it was being foreign. That last one makes everyone pause, because yes, the bird was brought from somewhere else, dressed up like nobility, treated like a guest until it stopped behaving the way people expected. Then it became a nuisance, a threat, a moral hazard. Sound familiar? You remember the shepherd's words from the trial. Maybe the real crime is ours. At the apothecary's stall, someone is selling peacock feather tea with claims it cures melancholy. You're pretty sure it doesn't, but they're also offering little peacock charms for courage, which feels oddly appropriate. And then there's the boy selling tiny carved replicas of the bird from before the trial. This one's shouting, he says, holding up a particularly chaotic carving. And this one's sleeping. Or judging. Can't tell. You buy both. The merchant grins. Most people want the loud ones. He says, They say it feels more honest. As evening settles in, you find yourself walking the old forest path leading out of town. You've heard rumors that the Peacock has been relocated to a distant estate, owned by some lesser noble who collects unusual animals. No one's sure exactly where it went, but people are already telling stories. They say the bird travels by gilded cart, that it now roams a rose garden surrounded by marble statues, that it's teaching other animals how to scream at authority. They say it laid an egg, just to confuse everyone. They say it winked at the judge on the way out. You smile. Humans need stories. And when one story ends, we keep it alive by dressing it in new clothes and sending it off to other towns. Which is what you do now, replaying the trial in your head, not for the legal details, but for the humanness of it all. Because it was never really about the bird. It was about noise. Discomfort. Beauty. Judgment. And how, sometimes, when we can't explain our unease, we put it on trial. Just as the stars begin to blink into view, you hear it. Faint, echoing, distant. HRAAAWWWWK. You stop. Wait. Nothing. And then, again, just on the edge of hearing, like a goodbye or a reminder. Somewhere out there, the peacock still screams. It's been a week. The town has settled back into its usual rhythm. Bread rises, bells chime, chickens squabble, and the bishop's assistant continues to act like someone swapped his wine with vinegar. But something has shifted, a small ripple under the surface of daily life. You can feel it in the way people pause before speaking, or glance sideways when someone struts a little too proudly through the square. Because even though the bird is gone, the idea of the trial lives on. At first, it starts with jokes. A local juggler performs with 3 bright balls and a fake feathered tail. Look, I'm being disruptive, he cries. People laugh, but the laughter is uneasy. The mayor's son gets caught sneaking pastries from the kitchen and is mocked by the other children. They tie a feather in his cap, call him Sir Sweettooth, and sentence him to public apology and dish duty. It's funny, but also oddly structured. The feather, after all, is starting to mean something. Symbols are sticky like that. You find yourself wondering how the peacock would feel about being turned into a metaphor. Probably annoyed, possibly smug, definitely loud. One morning, you visit the town archives. The clerk, a thin man who smells faintly of ink and pickled onions, lets you browse the old scrolls. Looking for other animal trials, he asks, "We've got one where a beetle infestation was excommunicated in 1422. Another where a frog was accused of impersonating a monk." You blink. Did it win? Depends how you define win, he replies, and goes back to cataloging dead tax records. You unroll a scroll from a neighboring region and read about a donkey that was once honored by monks for braying at the correct pitch during morning mass. A divinely inspired creature, they called it. You read another about a goat who was put on trial for leading children astray into the woods. No one questioned why children were following goats, but apparently they did ask whether the goat had bewitched their moral compass. Historians still argue whether these were genuine beliefs or veiled commentaries on more delicate social conflicts. It's easier, after all, to try a goat than a corrupt landlord. You roll the scrolls back carefully, your head spinning. When you return to the square, you notice something. People have started changing how they speak. Not a lot, but enough. A merchant thanks her apprentice for not screeching like a peacock. A teacher tells her students to walk with humility, not like that bird. Even the town crier, normally all lungs and no nuance, adds a flourish to his daily announcements. And let it be known, the tax collector arrives Tuesday, so prepare thy feathers. The phrase sticks. By midweek, children are saying things like "don't peacock" when someone shows off. Adults say feather trial to mean a petty argument, and someone has drawn a mural on the side of the tavern, the peacock in profile, blindfolded like Lady Justice, scales in one claw and a goblet of wine in the other. You stop to admire it. Someone behind you mutters, "If only the real courts were that elegant." You nod. Because that's the thing about the trial. It exposed something. Not just the town's opinion on birds, but its opinion on itself. The bishop, for example, now delivers his sermons more carefully. He avoids metaphors involving animals. His robes are plainer. There's even talk of giving up his peacock feather fan. The baker still grumbles, but he hasn't cursed a single animal since the verdict. He's even added a new pastry, Le Pain Silencio, a buttery tart shaped like a closed beak. It's oddly delicious. And the bishop's assistant, he's taken to writing letters to higher clergy, asking whether creatures without language may still tempt sin. You suspect he's still hoping for a retrial. No one else is, because the bird wasn't evil. It was just loud. And once the trial gave everyone a stage to project onto, they couldn't stop. That's the part people remember. You sit one afternoon in the chapel garden, the one where the peacock used to wander. It's quiet now. You can almost see the ghost of the bird, fanning its tail among the hedges, tilting its head at the ivy, utterly unbothered. A young couple walks by. The woman says, "I kind of miss it, even the yelling." The man replies. She shrugs. At least it was honest. That word again. Honest. There's single quotes as something about the peacock, its refusal to tone itself down. Its complete disregard for human ceremony that strikes people as deeply true. Disruptive, yes, but true. Historians still debate why that trial gained so much attention in later centuries. It wasn't the first peacock on trial, or even the most dramatic animal hearing of the period, but it lingered. Maybe because it revealed something funny and painful and strangely beautiful about people. Our desperate desire to find meaning, even in feathers. As the sun sets behind the chapel roof, you close your eyes and listen. The garden hums with insect life. The breeze stirs the hedges. A bird calls far off, not a peacock, something gentler. But for just a moment, you imagine that deep, terrible screech returning on the wind. And for just a moment, you kind of wish it would. The town fair arrives. 2 weeks later, as it does every year, bunting strung between windows. Children sticky with honeyed pears, and the scent of roasting chestnuts thicken the air. But this time, something's different, because this is the first fair since the peacock trial. And naturally, the bird has become the star of the festivities despite not being there. You stroll past stalls painted in vibrant greens and blues, feathers dangling from the awnings like protective charms. One vendor sells Judgment Day confections, sugar cookies shaped like gavels, scrolls, and peacocks with candy gem eyes. Another is offering pride punch, a suspiciously purple beverage that fizzes if you stir it counterclockwise. You ask what's in it, the vendor winks. Mostly grape juice. But with audacity, the town's artists have not held back. Children wear paper tail fans that shimmer in the sun. A band plays a bawdy tune called the Peacock's Plea, which rhymes vanity with tea, and ends on a honk from a homemade bird whistle. You try not to laugh. You fail. It's surreal. You watch the courtroom struggle with questions of sin and symbolism. Now those same questions are on t-shirts. You stop at a puppet show. The stage is a tiny wooden replica of the courtroom. The bishop puppet waggles his finger. The peacock puppet, far too detailed, flashes its tail, honks once, and sends the judge tumbling backwards with theatrical flair. The children cheer. A small boy yells, "Innocent and fabulous." The puppeteer bows. Truth through feathers. He says solemnly. You wander on, slightly dazed. It's as if the town has taken everything absurd about the trial and claimed it, owned it, made it part of its identity. Historians still argue whether the satire of animal trials helped communities process bigger ideas, justice, guilt, power, or if it just made them feel briefly clever. But either way, the trial has morphed into mythology now. And myth is a stubborn thing. Near the fountain, a group of amateur actors performs an impromptu reenactment of the screech. Everyone has a role: judge, bishop, baker, and of course someone draped in shimmering cloth. Peacock mask on their face, strutting and yelling dramatically at the sky. It's deeply ridiculous and strangely moving, because in a way, everyone is playing the peacock now, embracing the absurd, letting themselves be noisy, strange, and seen. Not judged but celebrated. You hear a pair of older women nearby discussing the trial in hushed tones. One says, "It was about pride." The other shakes her head. No, it was about people not wanting to hear what didn't flatter them. A third adds, "It was about putting the mirror on the altar and blaming the reflection." They nod. Someone hands them feathered fans. And suddenly, you remember something the defense said. Every feather, every scream, every insolent strut is the truth of what it is. That line's on a banner now. The banner hangs above the town square, where the mayor himself stands to deliver a brief speech. He clears his throat. "This year's fair," he says, "is dedicated to the unexpected guest who reminded us to listen carefully, even when the message is a little loud." The crowd laughs. The mayor continues, "Let us not forget that wisdom sometimes comes on two legs, with talent and no particular respect for church bells." Then he raises a toast to the peacock. Everyone joins in. It's a bizarre moment, but no more bizarre than the idea that a trial for a bird could shake a town to its core. And it has, quietly. The trial gave people a new way to talk about things they couldn't quite say: authority, beauty, conformity, noise. Some even whisper that the trial changed how the bishop writes sermons. More cautious now. Less fire. More questions. You walk through the fair until nightfall, past lanterns glowing like low stars and feathers drifting down from someone's costume. The joy is infectious, but beneath it is something softer, a kind of relief, the way you feel after laughing through something that nearly made you cry. The town has learned how to hold contradiction. That something can be silly and serious, that a creature can be loud and innocent, that a trial can be absurd and deeply revealing. Later, you sit on a stone bench at the edge of the square, sipping your second glass of audacity-infused punch. The sky has turned indigo. The stars blink awake. A little girl with painted feathers on her cheeks approaches you. "Did you see the peacock?" You smile. "I did." "Was it really that loud?" "Oh, louder," you say. "Louder than truth." "Sometimes." She nods solemnly. "Good." Then she runs off to join the next round of tail feather tag. You finish your drink. The music rises again. Someone starts the chorus of "Let the Bird Be Heard," and the whole crowd joins in. It's terrible. It's perfect. You lean back, letting the sounds wash over you, and you realize, even if the peacock never returns, its voice will echo here for years, because now, every time someone says "don't cause a feather trial," or hums that ridiculous puppet tune, they'll remember that once a town put pride on trial and ended up freeing itself instead. The fair is over. The last of the confetti has been swept into corners. The stalls are taken down. The paper tail fans lie crumpled in gutters, and someone has already begun scrubbing the mural off the tavern wall, grumbling about too many feathers and not enough beer. But the peacock trial lingers in conversation, in folklore, even in fashion. Someone's wearing a cloak embroidered with subtle, iridescent thread. A merchant's cart has been repainted with bright blues and golds. A baker pipes tiny feather patterns into the icing of her almond tarts. The bird may have gone, but its afterlife has only begun. You're back in the chapel garden. The bishop's assistant is here too, standing awkwardly among the hedges where the peacock once strutted. He holds a scroll and a quill. Mumbling to himself, you pretend not to watch. He mutters phrases like avian influence on sacramental reverence and sanctity interrupted by secular creature. You'd feel sorry for him if he didn't look so thoroughly convinced that the bird was sent by chaos itself. You leave him to his theological muttering. Across the garden, you spot something curious: a young boy and girl building a tiny courtroom. Out of sticks and stones, they place a wooden toy in the center: a chicken, maybe, and assign it a trial. The girl declares it too loud during matins. The boy objects. They call a pebble to the witness stand. You smile. It's ridiculous. But it's also exactly what happened here, just weeks ago. And now it's play. Historians still debate the long-term cultural impact of trials like this one. Some argue they blurred the line between justice and performance, turning serious matters into theater. Others claim they were a necessary outlet, giving people a strange kind of comfort. If even animals could be judged and heard, maybe there was room in the world for everyone's story. You walk through town, noticing how even the silence seems different now. Not empty or just filled with memory. At the library, a scribe is transcribing notes from the trial. He stops you at the door. "We're cataloging the case," he says, "for historical record." "Official court transcripts," you ask. "Oh no," he chuckles. "No one wrote anything down properly. We're collecting memories, eyewitness versions." The baker says the bird glowed. The bishop insists it mimicked the bells. A child claims it whispered secrets. "Are you writing all of it down?" He grins. "Every last bit." You glance at the parchment. In bold ink, someone has written, "The feathered trial," or "The day vanity stood before God." Dramatic, but not inaccurate. Later that afternoon, you're invited to a reading circle at the tailor's house. She's recently become obsessed with old bestiaries, those wild medieval texts that blend zoology, theology, and dreams. She reads aloud by firelight. The peacock, though adorned, may know not pride, for it is man who teaches it the meaning of mirrors. Everyone pauses at that line. Someone adds, "Maybe the crime wasn't vanity. Maybe it was interpretation." Someone else says, "Maybe we should try ourselves before we try the bird." There are murmurs of agreement. Then someone laughs and suggests a toast to all the things that can't defend themselves. "Too dark," someone counters. "To all the things that make us uncomfortable." Closer. And finally, to the loud ones, the bright ones, the ones we try to put on trial because we can't quite figure out why they bother us. Perfect glasses. Clink. A man in the corner asks, "Do you think it knew?" Everyone turns. Knew what? That it was being tried. There's a long silence. You remember the way the peacock looked around the courtroom. Calm, detached, occasionally exasperated. You say, "I think it knew it was being watched." And I think that was enough. Later, you walk home by moonlight. The town is asleep. The wind rustles the trees. Somewhere, an owl hoots, and then softly, far off, a sound. Hrog. You freeze. You wait. It doesn't come again. Was it real, or just the echo of memory? You smile. Because maybe the peacock was never about sin, or noise, or even feathers. Maybe it was just a mirror, held up to a town that didn't know what it looked like until something refused to bow. The seasons begin to turn. Autumn tiptoes into the village with golden light and cooler mornings. The chapel bells feel crisper in the air, the market quieter, and the vines in the garden fade from green to rust. But the peacock lingers, not in feathers, but in fables. It begins subtly. A teacher uses the trial to explain ethics to her students. Suppose a peacock walks into a church. She begins, and the children immediately grin. They know where this is going. In the baker's shop, two women debate whether prideful pastries are actually sinful or just delicious. The pastries in question are layered with dazzling stripes of jam and frosting, pure spectacle. No apology. Even the bishop, now recovering from a minor illness, delivers a sermon entitled "The Silence Between Cries." He doesn't mention the bird directly, but the metaphor is clear. "Beware," he intones, "of condemning the voice that interrupts comfort, for it may carry a truth you need." It's surprisingly poetic. And that's the thing. Something about the trial has given everyone in the village permission to be a little strange, a little loud, a little unpredictable. Because once you've witnessed a bird in court, screaming at a bishop and refusing to repent, your view of the world shifts. You find yourself visiting the edge of town more often now. Just outside the gate, a rough path curves into a quiet wood. A few villagers claim that's the direction the peacock's cart disappeared toward. Others say it never left at all. One afternoon, you meet the shepherd again, the same one who whispered that maybe the real crime was ours. He's sitting on a low wall, sharpening a small knife, not for malice, but to whittle wood. Beside him, a few carved figures line the grass, a feather, a judge's gavel, and of course a bird. You sit beside him, still think about it. You ask. More than I should, he replies. Funny thing is, I don't even like peacocks. Always thought they looked like gossip with wings. You laugh. He offers you one of the carvings. I've been making them, he says. Not to sell, just to remember. The way we all stood there, pretending we could measure something like noise in ounces of sin. You turn the carving over in your hand. It's rough, honest. A peacock mid-strut, head slightly tilted. Tail halfway fanned like it's caught between indifference and performance. Do you think it judged us? You ask. He shrugs. If it did, we probably deserved it. Silence stretches between you, peaceful. This time, not tense like in the courtroom. Just two people sitting with the weight of a very strange memory. And then he says, almost absent-mindedly, sometimes I wonder if we ever meant to find it guilty. You glance over. You think the trial was rigged? No, he says. But think about it. We dressed it up, gave it a platform, asked it to speak knowing it couldn't. Maybe we needed it to be innocent, so we feel better about being the ones who made it a problem. Historians still argue whether these trials were satire, morality plays, or exercises in mass projection. But none of them deny this. They said more about humans than they ever did about animals. You spend the evening with the shepherd, carving and talking. He tells you that in some traditions, the peacock is a symbol of immortality, its flesh believed to resist decay. In others, it represents resurrection. In medieval bestiaries, it's praised for its splendor and mocked for its voice. Always both. Always contradiction. You ask him if he thinks the peacock will ever come back. He grins. Wouldn't that be something? If one day we woke up and it was just in the square again, sitting on the well like it never left. Will we put it on trial again? Oh no, he says. Next time, we'd elect it mayor. You both laugh harder than you should. As twilight gathers, you head home. Through the woods, the light filters through thinning leaves and long stripes. Somewhere nearby, a jay calls. Not the same, but similar. You pause. You think of how the trial has become shorthand in the village. Don't peacock in church, someone says, and everyone knows it means don't show off. That's a feather trial waiting to happen, someone else says about a petty squabble. Language has absorbed the bird, and maybe, in a way, that's how it lives on. Not in the garden. Not even in memory. But in metaphor. The courtroom is used again now mostly for property disputes and the occasional complaint about someone's goat eating someone else's sermon notes. The judge seems relieved. The benches creak less under the weight of expectation, and yet someone always carves a small feather into the corner of the docket book, just to remember. You step through your door as the first stars appear. You light a candle, sit by the window, and wonder, if the bird does return, what will it say? And will we finally be ready to listen? One morning, weeks after the fair and months after the trial, something new appears in the town square. It's not loud. It doesn't strut. In fact, it doesn't move at all. It's a statue, a peacock, life-sized, carved from pale gray stone, wings tucked, tail down, neck tall and curved ever so slightly, as if it's about to glance over its shoulder and smirk. There's no plaque, no dedication. No one claims responsibility. It's just there. You're one of the first to see it. It stands in the spot where the real peacock often loitered, right next to the old well, between the bakery and the chapel garden. And unlike the garish festival puppets or the silly street murals, this is oddly elegant. Subtle, even reverent. The surface is smooth but not glossy. The tail feathers are etched with delicate swirls, not full plume display. The face is neutral. No mockery, no exaggeration. Just quiet presence. As the town wakes, people gather. At first, they ask questions. Who made this? Was it commissioned? Is this a joke? But as no answers come, the questions fade, and gradually the town just accepts it. By noon, a child has placed a single wildflower at the statue's feet. By evening, there are a dozen more. Someone sets a small, round stone on its back. Someone else balances a tiny scroll between its claws. By the following day, it has become a shrine. Historians still argue about the role of spontaneous monuments in small-town folklore. Some claim they signify unresolved conflict. Others say they're proof of collective grief or even guilt. But whatever the reason, the statue quickly becomes part of the town's rhythm. People stop and touch it on their way to the market. A teenager is caught whispering a wish into its unmoving ear. A visiting monk sketches it, noting the gentle stillness of a creature once accused. And you find yourself sitting near it more and more. Asterisk at first, just to watch, then to listen. Because even though the statue doesn't make a sound, the space around it hums with stories. One morning, an old woman sits beside you and says she once saw the real Peacock strut across the church steps while the bishop was mid-sermon. It looked at him like it knew what a metaphor was. She chuckles. Asterisk another time. A young girl admits she misses the bird's cry. It was like thunder, but personal. You nod. It had timing. You begin to understand something. The statue isn't about the bird. Not really. It's about the moment the town let itself be strange and serious and exposed. And how it survived that. One night, you pass by and find candles lit around its base. No ceremony, no priests, just flickering lights in glass jars and a scattering of feathers. Someone must have collected from the woods. A baker walks by and pauses, then shrugs and leaves a roll on the statue's feet. You don't ask why. No one does. There's a quiet power in not needing to explain something anymore. Later that week, a traveling performer visits the town, a weary man with a crooked flute and a voice like gravel, soaked in honey. He hears about the trial and decides to write a ballad. The Cry in the Cloister, he calls it. It's overwrought, a little absurd, but everyone gathers anyway. He sings of feathers and judgment, of moral panic and tail displays. He ends with a line that makes the crowd go still. In the end, the court gave verdict, but the bird gave truth. And there it is again, that uncomfortable, shimmering idea that sometimes the thing we put on trial isn't wrong, it's just honest. And we don't know what to do with honesty unless it wears robes and keeps its voice down. The bishop hears the song. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't applaud. But a week later, he replaces the brass cross on his staff with a simple wooden one. Lighter, plainer, easier to carry. The change isn't lost on the congregation. And the chapel garden? It blooms again. New flowers sprout where the bird once roamed. A few vines are trained into feather-like arches by some anonymous gardener. And once, just once, a visiting child yells from the hedges, "I think I saw it." Everyone rushes to look. But of course nothing's there. Still, for the rest of the day, people act a little differently, softer, smiling at strangers, as if maybe, just maybe, they did see something. Even the bishop's assistant stops correcting. Everyone's posture. Briefly. The statue remains, not revered, not guarded, just present. A silent reminder of the time the town opened its doors to something too bright, too noisy, too other, and came away changed. One evening, as the sun sets and the square glows orange and gold, you sit beside the stone peacock again. You lean back. Let the air wash over you. And in the distance, not near, but far, as though carried on memory, you think you hear it, a cry, wild, familiar, defiant. Or maybe it's just the wind, but you smile anyway. Winter comes slowly to the village, brushing the rooftops with frost and muting the bells with snow. The chapel garden sleeps beneath a thin white sheet, and smoke curls from chimney tops like quiet breath. And still, the peacock lingers, not in body, not even in recent conversation, but in the folds of habit woven into the rhythm of the town, like thread into wool. By now, the statue in the square is as much a fixture as the well or the old market post. People don't gawk at it anymore. They nod to it, a shared joke, a quiet prayer, a mark of identity. It has become local myth. One morning, a traveling scholar arrives. His boots are dusted with frost, his coat frayed at the edges. He stands in front of the statue for over an hour, taking notes. Eventually, he turns to you because of course you're nearby, watching. As always, Anne asks, "Did this really happen?" You blink. "What do you mean?" "The trial," he says. "Is it real, or some story people tell tourists?" You consider this. There's no official record, no paintings, no laws changed, just memories, songs, jokes, and this statue. You smile. Yes. He tilts his head. Yes, it happened, or yes, it's a story. You shrug. Yes. He jots that down. Historians still debate the line between lived event and local legend. Some argue that once something is read old enough, reshaped in songs and street theater, it becomes more myth than fact. Others say that myths are the only honest version of history because they carry the feeling, not just the details. The scholar leaves the next day, puzzled but intrigued. Meanwhile, the village carries on. The trial has faded into the background now, but its echoes ripple in the strangest places, in the weekly debates at the baker's table, in the bishop's sermons, which now always include one moment of silence for unexpected guests, in the way children paint birds on snow-covered windows and label them Our Lady of Loud Opinions. You visit the old courtroom one evening. It's empty, except for a few boxes of records and a broom leaning dramatically against the wall like it, too, is waiting to be accused. You sit in your usual spot. Remember how the light fell through the stained glass, how the air felt tight with judgment and absurdity. You imagine the Peacock again standing tall, blinking slowly, utterly unbothered. What was it thinking? Probably nothing, but also, maybe everything. You leave a feather one you found in the forest, greenish and frayed on the judge's bench. Just a token, just in case. Back outside. The air has turned colder. Snowflakes drift like ash. The world is quiet. And you realize something. The trial didn't change the town because it taught them about birds. It changed the town because it made them stop, really stop, and listen. Not just to the cry of the bird, but to each other, to the things they'd buried under tradition and pride and noise, to their own strange beliefs, their borrowed guilt, their soft longing for clarity in a world that rarely offers it. The Peacock didn't demand answers. It simply refused to be silenced, and that alone was enough to shake everything loose. Later, back at your home, you sit beside the fire and reread an old letter someone passed you, a copied page from a distant town, telling of a similar animal trial decades ago. In that case, it was a goat accused of walking backward during a funeral procession. It was hanged, but scribbled at the bottom is a note, added by some forgotten scribe. It is unclear whether the goat meant offense, or simply had its own sense of direction. You smile, because that, really, is the question at the heart of it all. Are we judging what we don't understand, or are we punishing what refuses to mirror us? You close the letter. Outside, the wind carries a sound, half whistle, half groan, a trick of weather, or something more. You don't need to know. You already understand. In this village, the Peacock stood trial. And in doing so, it helped everyone see themselves just a little more clearly. The snow thickens. Puffs vanish beneath white drifts, and the village settles into that quiet rhythm only deep winter brings, measured in soup bowls, candle wax, and how long it takes mittens to dry by the hearth. The Peacock, by now, is memory, but not gone, because something happens when a story lingers long enough in a place. It becomes part of the soil. The stone. The songs hummed absent-mindedly as people peel apples or stoke the fire. You walk through the square one evening, boots crunching over ice. The statue is half buried in snow, a soft white cap on its head, the tail barely visible. Someone has tucked a knit scarf around its neck, blue and green, of course. You stop and brush the snow gently from its face. Beneath your gloved hand, the stone is cold, but somehow the gesture feels warm across the square. An old man sits with his grandson on a bench, pointing at the statue. You know what that is? He asks. A bird, a peacock. The man corrects. The boy nods solemnly. What did it do? The man chuckles. Mostly it just shouted. Why? The man pauses. Because that's what it does. The boy thinks this over, then shrugs. Okay? No judgment, no confusion, just acceptance. And maybe that's the true legacy of the trial, not the verdict, not the statue, not the songs or the souvenirs, but the fact that people learned, over time, to let the bird just be. Historians still argue whether the whole event was an accident of hysteria, or a moment of collective wisdom, whether the townspeople were foolish or brave, whether the peacock was a symbol, a scapegoat, or just a bird. But for the villagers, it was all of those things, and none of them. You stop by the tailor's shop. She's embroidering a new line of coats, deep winter wool, with feathered stitching along the sleeves. Subtle, stylish, one of them bears the symbol of a tiny scale, balanced delicately atop a bird's claw. Trial wear, she says with a wink. You ask her how business is. Oh, people like to remember, she replies, especially the bits that don't quite make sense. You buy a scarf. As you walk home, the village sleeps around you, soft and blanketed. In a few days, the new year will arrive. Fresh pages, new snow. And yet, you have the sense that the peacock will rise again. Not literally though, honestly, who knows? But in stories. In quiet rebellions. In the laugh someone lets out when they remember how serious the courtroom felt right before a bird honked at God. Because some things never really leave. They perch somewhere just beyond the ordinary, waiting for someone to say, remember when? And just like that, they return. In the morning, the town will wake again. Bread will rise, fires will crackle. Someone will stub a toe and curse loudly, and someone else will say, that's a feather. Trial if I've ever heard one. And somewhere, maybe in a forest clearing, or in the back room of a scribe's office, or in the corner of a dream, a peacock will scream, because that's what it does. And this time, no one will ask it to explain. So now, as the snow settles, and the candles burn low, let yourself drift gently away from the town, away from the courtroom. The feathers, the laughter, and the long, echoing cry of something that once refused to be ignored. You've walked a winding road tonight through foolishness and wisdom, judgment and jest, rituals and roast chestnuts. You sat in pews and on stone benches, listened to sermons and puppet shows, and followed the ripple of one strange bird through a whole community. And now, with the windows dim and the world softened into quiet, you don't need to think about verdicts or meaning or metaphors, just the hush, the peace, the warmth tucked around you like a tail folded at rest. Take a slow breath, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Feel the weight of your body where it rests, light, but present, like the snow on a statue, like a memory you don't need to hold onto, because it's already part of you now. Let the images blur, courtroom walls melting into trees, feathers fading into clouds, echoes slipping into dreams. You're safe, you're still, and the only thing left now is rest. No more questions. No more trials. Just the quiet rustle of story turning into sleep. Good night. Asterisk.